I got a buddy down there that's got the greatest story in the world. Drew pictures for 5 years while he's in a hospital, Navy Cross man. And the doc got operated on the field hospital. The doctor come down there and read the whole damn operation. I used a #2 suture on that, his liver was punctured. Read the whole thing. They had us 2 years ago, me and Dwayne up there in Washington, had 4 nurses from the hospital, shipped it, everything. Well, he's down there. He comes down every year. And, but they're having us again up there at the Naval Medical, Naval Surgeon General is inviting us up there, the 19th.
What we do is, okay, the first thing we have you do is spell your name, last name first.
Collins, Collins, Senior. Louis, Louist, which is for Tate, Tate, Collins.
Okay. Branch of service
Army.
and rank.
Max, I was staff acting tech, but I never did make tech really. I'd gone between 3 different regiments.
Okay. Let's start sort of at the very beginning. Before you actually went in the service, tell me where you were, what year it was, what was going on in your life at the time, and how you ended up in the service.
Well, I lived in Norfolk, and I was working for Virginia Engineering, which was a contract company at the base, and working with the surveyors on the outlying fields, the airfields. I think we had 5 or 6 or 7 different airfields that we laid out and moved on to the next one and came back to put in buildings, to lay out the buildings, the surveying, in other words. That's what I'd been doing. And at 17 years old, I was made a block warden. During the war, they had the block wardens that you go around and make sure everybody kept their curtains closed, and no lights. And that kind of got me into the mood of military. A friend of mine had joined the paratroops, and I elected to do the same thing. And at 17, my mother had to sign for me, so I went directly into the paratroops in basic training into the 501 Parachute Regiment. And we went through basic training as a whole regiment, having had no basics before. And we went from basic training into the parachute school in Fort Benning, Georgia. And there, of course, we went through a month of parachute training, a lot of physical and so forth. But 501 then moved to Camp McCall, North Carolina. And of course I was with them and went on with them. But they decided, or somebody decided, to have another regiment start up in Fort Benning, which was a 542nd Parachute Regiment. And I was transferred from the 501 to the 542nd as cadre with a sergeant that had been sergeant in my platoon. Then I went there with him as cadre to the 542nd. I went as a staff sergeant to a platoon. And once having gotten there, they decided to put me in battalion as S2 and S3 sergeant. It was plans and training and intelligence. It was a pretty fast rise for a 17-year-old,
Yeah,
It was a rather a tough one, really. But after being in battalion for several months, I got a stomach full of that in a hurry and requested overseas transfer. And they granted that, and I went to Camp Fort Meade, Maryland, with a group which I had been sending the transferees out to go overseas. So I just put myself on a list on the cadre, on the TO, Table of Organizations. And there were no sergeants required, all of them PFCs. So I had to take a drop then from sergeant to PFC, which I found to be very peaceful, and you know, it's a nice place to be. You didn't have to sweat and worry about all the biggies. They didn't bother you. But in Fort Meade, we trained for a while there, and left Fort Meade and went to Camp Perry here in Newport News area. And from Camp Perry, we shipped out here, out of Newport News, on a ship called the Empire Anvil. It was a real tough one because my home is just across the water, you know, in Norfolk. And I could see my best friend's home, which was there on the water, and I could see it as we went out, and it was that was a god-awful feeling. Being this close to home, I took off at Camp Perry, and because we weren't supposed to go out at all, but I checked to see if I could get across the water on the ferry, but I couldn't. There was MPs all over the place. So I just had to sneak back to Camp Perry and wait for the movement to get out of here. But it was rather tough getting out of the area on that boat, knowing I'd never been on a big boat like that. And
what was it like when you went through paratrooper training to be able to put those black boots in and tuck your pants in? Because I mean, that marked you all. I mean, you were the.
well, that was quite an experience. We were trained as we went through that physically. We were hellacious, you know. We were tough. The big thing was that we were supposed to be able to whip 3 men with no trouble at all. And actually, we could. I had an experience in Norfolk. I came home one time on leave, and met a girl and took the girl down to the Naval Base gate. You're not familiar with that probably, or you are. Are you familiar with it? Well, there used to be a lot of bars along there. Well, I was in my jumpsuit. Now, that was the thing that really set us off. The jumpsuit looked like it would, and was, enough of a uniform to fool the MPs. They thought we were officers. And my name is Louis T, LT, and I would sign my entry into these different places, LT Collins, L period T Collins. Not intentionally. The first time I did it intentionally was going to, what's the name of it, the Navy, forgot the name of the place now, but it was the Navy training, officers training. Anyway, I signed in that way, and that's why the guards referred to me all the way down the line. All right, Lieutenant. I said, I'm not a lieutenant. The LT, that was it, you know.
I like that.
Yeah, well, it worked pretty good. It got me through there nicely. Anyway, where was I?
The girl.
Oh, we went in a bar there, and where I wasn't legally old enough to drink. Nobody said a thing about it, you know. They didn't ask me if I was 17 or 10 or what. So we went in, I ordered beer. So he brought 2 steins out, you know, those old big ones with the handles. In the glass. I guess you call them steins or mugs. Well, the restaurant, the bar, had a marble tabletop. It was like the old ice cream parlors. Had the old heavy chairs and marble tabletops. Well, this one young sailor came over to me and he said, hey, he said, you're a paratrooper? And I said, yes, sir. He was young. It looked like he might have been younger than I was, you know. But I had my jump wings on the whole bit. I felt superior to any and everybody. And he said, my brother told me that you guys could whip 3 men. And everything kind of dropped at that point, you know. I'm saying, what the hell am I getting into? And the girl is sitting over smiling, and she's happy because I told her I could whip 3 men, and that's what she'd like to see, you know. And he said, I'll tell you. He said, I don't think you can. I said, well, you can. He said, I'm going to go get a couple of guys, and we'll try it. I said, okay, because I really didn't think he'd do it. So he came back in about 10 minutes, and he had this old, and I say old, I mean a mature chief. Now, I know something about the Navy. There's stripes they have on their sleeves, you know, for time. They have either gold or red. The gold stripes are good conduct, but the red stripes, you know, he hasn't really stuck to all the good stuff. They had bad conduct, or at least they weren't good conduct. And he pops me on the shoulder. You want to know what my name was? And I told him. And he said, this young man came over and got me a few minutes ago. He said you could whip 3 men, full size. I said, yeah, that's right. He said, well, he wants to try it. And he couldn't find 2 guys his size, so he got me, and I'll make up for the other 2. And I said, oh my God, I'm really getting in it now. And the girl, she's got the big smile on her face, and I could not let myself down in front of the girl. If we'd been outside, I think I would have said, look, fellas, we made a mistake, I'll leave you, but I didn't. So then it became a matter of how am I going to handle this guy? And all these sailors were watching now. They had heard what was going on, and they knew what was going on. So the chief said, well, let's go on outside and get this thing done. I said, all right. So I reached over and got her beer mug, and I had my beer mug, and I cracked them on the table, and I came up with 2 chunks of glass. And the old chief looked at me, and he looked at those handles, and he laughed like hell. And he said, you can do it. He said, I believe it. And they all went outside. I mean, all of them went outside. Well, the bartender came over and says, you're going to get the hell outside too. He says, you really fouled me up. And he said, I can't sell any beer. And get on outside and get this thing done. So I said, okay. And I started out, and when I did, the chief came back in. And he was laughing fit to be tied. And he said, I really believe it, you can do that. And he shook my hand. We had a good time. He bought all the beer. I didn't pay for another thing the whole evening. Lord.
Close call.
Close, yes, sir. That was a close call.
When did you actually ship out to Europe as you're working your way up?
Well, we shipped out from here on the Empire Anvil, which was one of those Liberty ships. And it was quite a bunch of us. And we sailed up to I guess it was Newfoundland, and waited for a convoy to get together. And the convoy got together, and away we went with them. And we had been told in Newfoundland that we should be prepared for being sick, because he said the weather was really bad across the North Atlantic. Again, the biggest thing I'd ever been out in is a rowboat. And that was right out here in the river. And never intended to get in a big boat, but it did at that point. And the seas were so rough. We had British corvettes were the convoy. They were our security as we went across. I don't know how many boats were there, because we never saw more than one boat other than our own. And we saw a corvette one time. But these seas were running, my God, like 50 foot. We'd go down and you couldn't see a damn thing but water. And then we'd come up and then we couldn't see anything but the tops of water, and the other boats they were under, you know. It was just the most ungodly thing I've ever been through. And it lasted a good part of the whole trip across. We landed in Scotland and went from Scotland to Ireland. We were there in what was called Hollywood, Ireland. We got some, what we called education then, a lot of education. And finally we got out of Ireland and into England and into an area called Hungerford Berks. Hungerford was a town, and I guess Berks is the name of like a county, Hungerford County or whatever. We were there for a good while and did some training, and another couple of jumps. And then we were prepared for the Normandy, or the Normandy crossing. And we were in the marshalling area there for, I guess, maybe 8 or 10 days. We were supposed to have jumped the day before we actually jumped. But if you remember your history, the weather was a little rough, so they held it off. But we went on the 6th, and actually we went on the first or second or third hour, I've forgotten, of the 6th. And we flew out across Normandy and Brittany, the peninsula of Brittany as well, and came back across Brittany and Normandy and going back to England. And the anti-aircraft fire was so bad against the transports that the pilots elected to take some evasive action. They weren't supposed to. They were all supposed to stay in line, and everybody had jumped so we could put us all in the field at one spot. But I guess things happen that really make a big difference in whether you live or not. Because the dispersal that they made in trying to get away from the anti-aircraft fire was enough to spread them all the way out. Nobody really got where they were supposed to be in jumping. But if the planes had really stayed in, and I've always felt this way, and my buddies did too, that if we had landed as we were supposed to, the Germans would have been able to know exactly where we were, and we would have had big forces on us. As it was, we were spread out so far and so thinly that they didn't know where the heck we were. You know, they didn't know whether to come over here or over there or where, because we were everywhere.
Did you know where you were when you landed?
No, sir, I didn't. No. I had
Was it dark?
the moon was out. It wasn't, not real dark, no.
What was night?
Yeah, it was night. But I had a problem. When we left England and we got in planes, they gave us, not a sleeping pill, but what do they call that?
Dramamine.
Dramamine, yeah. And I took my Dramamine, and I got a little bit sleepy, and I went to sleep in the plane going across. And I didn't wake up until they said, they hollered, prepare to hook up. That's when I woke up. Well, I had a musette bag on my side, and it had a leather thong holding it to my leg. I also had a S&S fighting knife on my ankle. It was on with leather thongs. And the leather thong on the musette bag dropped down below the knife and caught on the knife, and when I went to stand up, I couldn't straighten this leg all the way out. And I had to sit back down. In the meantime, you got your anchor line snap fastener in my right hand, and I'd hit the wire with it and had to unhook it. Trying to remember now because I haven't thought about this part of it. Trying to be a little precise. Anyway, when I sat back down, the anchor line snap fastener was closed. This little snap went up and closed it. And I didn't realize it. But I got the leather thong off and stood up, and by this time, the stick had gone. I mean, there was nobody there but me standing at the anchor line. Anchor line being the cable that runs the length of the plane that your parachute ripcord basically hangs on. And when you jump out, it pulls it and your chute opens. But I went to hook up, and it wouldn't hook up because it was closed. Now I had to stop and open it up again and hook it on. And by that time, the flight engineer, the sergeant who was in charge of the plane in the back, he's screaming like a idiot. You know, get out, get out, get out, get out. Well, they had orders that nobody came back to England unless they were mortally wounded. If the crew chief didn't kick everybody out of the plane and make sure everybody was gone, then he was threatened with cowardice in the face of the enemy. So he had his .45 and he was ready to shoot me. He didn't understand what was happening, and I don't blame him for that, but he sure wanted me out of that plane in a hurry. In the meantime, the plane has gone into jumping attitude, which he did, and the stick jumped. And then after they got out of the plane, which is a matter of just seconds, he gets out of jumping attitude. They drop down to drop the nose down and go towards the ground so that you miss the tail when you go out. Well, that's all done now. He's heading for the beach, and it's full throttle. And that's what I had to jump in. You know, you never jump with full throttle, but I did that time. And fortunately, I made it all right. I finally got out the door, and it was like a huge, big field, nice green, almost like a lawn. That's the way it looks. Until I hit the water. And the Germans had inundated the beach behind the sand dunes. And the water in there was as much as 6 feet deep. And if you got in a ditch, which was along the hedgerows, then it could be as much as 8 feet deep. So I had one heck of a hard time getting out of there. But in the meantime, the Germans were shooting across the water at anything that looked like it moved, and if your chute was up and full, we had machine gun fire on that. So I finally got it down, but in the water right up to my neck. Rifle was underwater. Didn't know whether it was going to shoot if I could get out of there and get a chance to shoot it. That's a gas-operated rifle, and I just never encountered the damn thing with water. So anyway, I finally got out of the water. Took quite a while going across. And finding spots in the hedgerows and so forth. And I spotted an old farmhouse. And am I getting too far ahead of you?
No, this is good.
I spotted this old farmhouse, and I finally got out of the water, and on top of the hedgerow, there wasn't much hedge on top of that one. But the hedgerow is really, the ditch has been excavated and piled up beside it, and over the years the hedges have grown up in that pile of dirt. That's what a hedgerow is. So they could be either that high or, 5 feet higher. Anyway, I stood up on that hedgerow and looked around, marveling at the fact that I made it that far. And because there's shooting going on all around, you could hear machine guns and the planes and so forth. They were still running. And it was starting to get light enough so that I could see. It was right on the side of a road. There's a little country road there, and just beyond the farmhouse, it turned, made a left turn, and went on towards the beach. And in my innocence and lack of experience, I jumped down on the roadway and walked across to the farmhouse and knocked on the door. I don't know why I did that, but I did. Knocked on the door, and an old lady came, an old French lady, and I asked her if there was any Germans, how the Bosch, and no, it scared her half to death. And she disappeared back in the house. I went back out, and the best thing I could think of was to get back on the hedgerow and look around some more, which I did. And just in a matter of minutes, she and the old man came out with a baby carriage. You can imagine something back in the 20s in a baby carriage. Well, she had that thing piled high with everything, and she and he ran out and got in a roadway, and down they went. They took off. And I'm still looking around, and I look down where the road curved, and I see these two Germans walking around the curve, coming in my direction. Well, they've got their rifles on their shoulder, slung on their shoulders. And they looked fairly young. They didn't look like, I guess they didn't look professional to me. I was expecting the SS troopers and, mighty people. And anyway, they came around the corner, at which time I had to decide whether I was going to jump down in the water. They saw me at the same exact time. And I didn't know whether to try to shoot, because I'd taken my rifle out of my bag, out of the chute, the parachute bag. But I still didn't know if the darn thing would shoot. That's a terrible feeling, to not know whether what you have there to protect yourself would actually shoot. Or maybe it would blow up in my face. I didn't know that. Anyway, I decided to take the easy way. I dropped the gun and held my hands up and hollered, forgot the word now. Comrade, that's the quit, Well, they snatched their rifles off their shoulders and bore down on me, and they started shooting. Why they didn't hit me, I don't know. Or why they fired at all, because I'd given up. But that taught me a lesson that I didn't forget. That, you just don't give up in a situation like that. Someone will get you sure as anything. And as they were firing, I dropped down on my knees and grabbed the rifle, and that thing shoots 8 times, so you've got some firepower. The M1, 30 caliber. Well, I put them both down. The rifle fired perfectly. I put them both down, and I threw another clip in and hit them some more. I wanted to make sure they were down and gone. And of course, I jumped then back in the water, got behind the hedgerow again, so I wouldn't be seen if there was a group following behind them. And that was the problem then. I thought could they be the point of some other organization, you know, some other German troops? As it was, they were not. Thank goodness, because they didn't move anymore, and no more Germans came around the corner. So I was rather lucky, I guess. I left that spot and kept going down the hedgerow on the backside of the road, and I finally came upon another spot that had an opening, and I could see a little farmhouse there. Well, I sat there for, I guess, 15, 20 minutes and made sure there was nobody else moving around. No more Germans anyway. And then I walked over and knocked on that door. Again, I think about it now, I wouldn't do that today. I'd go over and knock the door down and go in, but I wouldn't knock on the door. But I did go over and knock on the door, and the father came to the door and gave me all the big greetings. Vive la France, vive l'Amérique, vive l'Anglais. And hugged me and that sort of thing and pulled me inside. And he had a daughter in there with him and his wife. And he had been getting our supply chutes. They would drop their supplies in a bag, and he was opening up the supply chutes and getting out of it what he wanted and bringing it in the house. Well, it was, you know, he's in the farm, and these things are all over the place, hanging in the air in the trees. And he gave me cigarettes, and all my K rations, everything else were soaked. But he resupplied me, which was amazing to me. But he resupplied me, and I asked him where the town was, which was Avnaville. English pronunciation would be Ravnaville in France, which was not our goal. We weren't supposed to be there. I think we were supposed to be somewhere like St. Mary-Glise. But that's where the map showed that it was supposed to, that I was. And he tells me that, and then, how do you understand a Frenchman? Well, you listen to what he's saying and try to put it with something that you know, and he's moving his hands around and he draws little pictures, and it's rather tough. Anyway, he sent his daughter out to hook up the little cart with a horse, and she pulled it back in front of the barn, in front of the house, and he told me to get in. You know, he indicated I should get in there, and she was going to take me down to Avnaville. Hell, I'm still innocent. I don't know what's going on. So I'm sitting up there with her on the seat. It's like 8 feet off of the ground in this little buggy, and she's driving me down the road, and I'm sitting up there like an idiot. Was it Krauts or anybody else to shoot, but I didn't know any better. And we got to the town, or what looked like the edge of it, and she stopped and put me off. And then she turned the cart around and went back. So I walked on into town. So snooping and pooping, you know what that is. You got your rifle, so you're going along to be careful. Well, I was snooping and pooping more or less going through the town. And all of a sudden, it seemed like every door in the town opened up at the same time. All these people flew out. Well, I didn't know whether it was Germans going to come out or what, but it was the town people. And they were doing this, Vive la France, Vive l'Anglais, Vive la King, you know, everything. It was and hugging and kissing me and all this, and I don't know whether to shoot them or lay down and run. But this one old gal took me in a little, I guess it was a seamstress, her little shop. And the others kind of crowded in also. You couldn't move. They had me tied down that tight. And she took out these little things that looked like thimbles, little glasses. And got a bottle and was pouring out a little drink of cognac. Well, it's two. The cognac is one thing, but Calvados is another. And I'm sure to this day that that was Calvados. Now, Calvados is 180 proof, grain alcohol. And I'm sure that's what that was, because nothing ever blew my helmet off my head, and I think that did. But they did this bit again of Vive la France, Vive l'Anglais, Vive l'Amérique, and then they take a sip. Well, I was well beyond the sip bit. The sip wasn't going to do it for me, I'll tell you. I was shook. And I took the whole thing down at one time, this little thimble, and I swear I couldn't breathe for 3 or 4 minutes. My God, it was awful. But we went through that 2 times, and I finally got out, and they told me of the Americans down the other end of town, small town, kind of like from the roadway up there back to here. So I walked on down, and that was more of an enclosure. It was a big wall around this farmhouse, and you walk in through the gate. The gate was high. And it was like walking to something 500 years ago, prehistoric almost. But my friends were all there. And friends, guys that I jumped with, they were out, and then it's surprising how far you go if you don't get out with them. In a matter of a second, at 200 miles an hour, how far does the plane go? And I had gotten quite a ways ahead of them. In fact, if I'd gotten much more, I'd landed in a channel, which would have been awful. But they were there, and there was one officer that had gotten there also, and I can't remember his name. But you remember seeing in, I think it was in the movies, probably one of the first pictures that came back from D-Day was this wild-looking paratrooper holding a German flag, and he had a machete and guys with him strung up on both sides. Do you remember that picture? I was in that picture on the left side. When they cropped the picture, evidently I got cut out. That was the dangest thing. I talked to my company commander, Captain Hancock. I talked to him yesterday. And one of my buddies who was Gladstone, Sammy Gladstone, to kind of refresh my memory on Holland. They both live in California, so I spoke for about 3.5 hours to them. And the men that were in that enclave with me, eventually we all got back into a bigger group and ran into more of our troops, and went then into Carrington. That was a main goal for us, was to take Carrington, which was the first major city in France to have been captured. But the next night, I guess it was, when I spoke with Sammy yesterday, I'll mention this now, it's a little early, but he was over on one side of a little knoll, and he was on guard duty. And, you know, he was watching for things to happen. In the meantime, I had picked up a 7.65 pistol, a little small pistol, and I had it in my hand when I went to sleep. I laid down on the other side of this little knoll from him, and I had this thing in my hand. Well, as I said, I went to sleep. And he, knowing that I'm next up, he comes over on the knoll, just comes up on top of the knoll and calls for me to come and take over the guard duty. Well, when he came over the knoll, he looked, and I've got this pistol shooting, aiming right at his ears. And he said that was a scary thing. I guess it was. But I took my guard duty and so forth. But I guess we were there in Normandy for, I guess, 3 weeks, something like that.
Then we went back to England.
Then we went back to England and prepared for the future assignments.
Jump in Holland.
Well, it wasn't to jump in Holland at that point. We just went back to prepare for another jump. But well, one thing I miss is one major battle that we were in. That was in taking Carrington, and there was one particular spot. It was what they called a cabbage patch, because that's what was there, was a cabbage patch. And the fighting was back and forth with the Germans on that cabbage patch. And our company commander, Captain Hancock, today has a plaque. Someone put it up, I guess it was the city of Carrington. There's a plaque there, and it's called Captain Hancock's Cabbage Patch. So he's got his name in the fight we had there, which was really rugged. That was a rugged fight. We went into bayonet charges and that sort of it. And the 506, I think, had been there before we got there and had done a bayonet charge. It was a real tight one, and there was a lot of waterways. Most of the country is full of water anyway, especially when we get to Holland. Now we've got water. Yeah. But we went on up to Cherbourg, which, as you know, was up on a point. And we outposted that for security because they anticipated the Germans putting a German paratroop unit in, dropping them on Cherbourg to try to get behind us. So we were outposting the area to make sure that the Germans didn't get through to Cherbourg. Then we went back to the beach and on a ship, and we went back to England. Very nice to go back to England and go back to the same old bunker we were in before. And we were there for a good while. We got a weekend of leave, so we could go into London or whatever. And we had a ball. Really had a ball. And then eventually they set up this jump for Holland, which was done by Montgomery, General Montgomery of the British Army. And what most people don't know is that you had the Second Army, the Third Army, and Patton had this one, that, and the other one. Well, Montgomery had the first Allied Airborne Army. We had never heard of it before. And as soon as we got ready for the jump, we were advised in the marshalling area that we were going to be fighting with the British, under British command, the 82nd and the 101st, with the American divisions involved in the push to Arnhem, which was under British control. And we had never been under anything other than the American Army. It was kind of different. Bully beef and weird things. Yeah, it's a weird thing, a weird operation. But we went into the marshalling area there, and eventually we flew out of, we never knew what base we were flying out of. But I know when we flew going to Holland, you could see the white cliffs of Dover behind us as we left them. And as we flew over the Dutch countryside, the Germans had flak towers that were maybe 75 or 100 feet high. And they were like up on stilts and a gun or two guns up on top, which is the flak tower thing. That's before we ever dropped. But we could see the flak towers, we could see them shooting. It was a daylight jump. We didn't jump at night there. And you could see the British Typhoons, the planes, and our planes flying down and shooting these towers, trying to knock the towers out. It was really interesting. It was weird that it was more like a movie when we watched all of this.
Yeah, hanging from a parachute, right?
Well, we weren't yet. We were still in the planes.
Oh, still on the plane, okay.
Yeah, we were still in the planes. It was just real weird because we jumped in Normandy, but you couldn't see anything really, except machine gun fire. And then, of course, we landed in Holland, and we could see way out beyond the drop zone. And the Typhoons, the British planes again, and our planes were strafing the whole area all around it. And our outfit stayed pretty close there and kept it safe because the gliders were coming in, and we had to keep the field open. So we pretty well secured the field for a while.
Now, was that the drop that pushed the Germans, then they came back and pushed back?
Well,
In Holland, was that
the British were at this point trying to push the Germans down the coast and trying to get them all inland and down the coastline and then up to Arnhem. They were going to push them all the way around Arnhem and back up into Germany. That was, I think, somewhat of a plan. But we had, prior to jumping, I almost forgot this. If you read the history, and I'm sure you have, you seem to know what you're asking. But there was a battle in a town, Falaise Gap. The Falaise Gap was oh my God, it was a slaughterhouse. The Air Force, they destroyed 2 armies there, right there, pretty close to Falaise Gap. Prior to our going into the drop zone, to the marshalling area to jump in Holland, we were taken to the marshalling area, just 1 battalion, and we were issued bazookas, every man, and we all carried bazooka ammunition, and the intent was to capture a German general, and I can't remember who he was, but this was in Falaise, the town of Falaise. We were supposed to capture this German general and then defend the town or stop the retreating German armies. Note I used 2 there. 2 German armies were retreating through that area, and we were supposed to stop these tanks with the bazookas that we had after capturing this German general. And once we had jumped into Falaise, the plan was that Patton would break out from his holding position, and within 8 hours he would be relieving us there in Falaise Gap. Well, again, things worked really good sometimes. The black box, and you've probably heard of it because the British had it. They had this black box that they could decode and get the information that the Germans were sending out. They couldn't tell anybody that they had the black box. And we never heard that Patton was told to move, that the army had moved in front of him. The Germans had moved the whole army out in front of him. They were not there anymore. He had a wide open shot right on through. And if he'd had to fight his way through the German army, then he would have been there in 8 hours. As it was, we were there on the airport, in the planes, ready to take off, and the jump was canceled because Patton had already overrun the Falaise Gap. He had already overrun the town. God, we were glad. But that was more or less I looked at it like a suicide mission. We've got these bazookas and we're going to stop these damn tanks coming down. We fought tanks before in Normandy, and I couldn't see how we were going to stop two German armies coming down on top of us with these. Oh my, it was awful. But when they stopped us and told us to deplane, then they said Patton had overrun the drop zone. Used a little foul language. Many people called Patton a son of a bitch. But I'll tell you, boy, he was our son of a bitch. And after that shot, you know, nobody in our presence talked Patton down. He was just like God to us because he had saved our butt. I'm sure of that we wouldn't have made it if we had not had him go ahead of us. And we had him again in Bastogne, but that's going ahead a little
Now,
bit.
so you're still sitting in England. How did you get across and end up in Bastogne?
And where?
In Bastogne. When did you actually come
Oh,
to France?
well, we were in Holland for 72 days. 72 days of front-line fighting. That's the longest period of constant combat of any American army or any American group to that point in time. So we were there for 72 days and we held that record. And we got the, I forgot what thing it was. We got a medal for it. I can't remember what it was. It was the first time that the whole
Like a presidential citation?
presidential unit citation, it was the first time that a whole division had been awarded that at one time. It was because of our having been in Holland. But prior to going through Holland, I wanted to follow up one thing. I don't know what kind of information you want, you know, experiences, but to give you one that is a real corker. I told you about giving up in Holland, in Normandy, and surrendering. Well, they wouldn't accept it, so. And they missed all the good shots. They had a lot of them. I was right up on top of the bank. Don't understand why I didn't get hit, but I didn't. And I got those two men, so that was luck on my part, I guess. More training, really. But we try to think of being lucky. Well, in D plus 3 or 4 in Holland, we were setting up, the platoon was setting up for a night security area. We were in this little field in a barn, and there's a huge ditch, and they were going to set up a defensive position there. So Sergeant Johnson took myself and Gray Edwards into this big deep ditch. And 3 or 4 other men were behind us as well. And the sergeant was going to set us up so we would have a defensive position ahead of us, on the other side of the ditch. Well, to do that, we had to climb up, and the ditches were deep. They were 8 or 10 foot deep. The drainage ditches, really. But you had to dig holes in the side in order to get up high enough to see out, which we were told to do. Now, the sergeant set off a couple of men, and we kept walking. He set us off then, Gray and I. And then he, the sergeant, continued to walk down this ditch. Said he was going to reconnoiter the ditch and see where the Germans really were. So he's going down the ditch, not knowing what the hell he's going into. As it happened, he got shot, And the next day we got him back in a prisoner exchange of wounded prisoners. He only got shot in the shoulder, so he wasn't shot seriously. But as he went on down the ditch, we started digging in to the side to get up, to get some fire. And Gray Edwards had done some digging, and then he came down, and we got these little things that you've seen them, little tiny shovels, which are not really a lot of help. But that time they finally got us up partially. But I'm digging away and digging away. It's hard ground. And I hear this noise behind me. I hear something, guttural sounds. And I said, Gray, get your butt down here and give me a hand digging this hole. What are you doing? Come on down here and give me a hand. No answer. Then I hear this noise again, but this time I hear it very distinctly. WW2, Schweinhund, come and see here. And my heart dropped down my belly. Oh my God, we've been, I'm caught this time. There had to be a German. And I hollered back and I said, stop playing around and get on down here and stop that damn German crap. And he said, Rip, if you don't look around and look up here and you don't move quickly, this little sucker is going to blow your head off. Now the language was greater than that. I don't know what you're going to do with this film, so I don't want to put it all in there. But it came down to either I got up there or I was going to get shot very quick. And I'm halfway up the ditch, just in these little grab holes. And I look back, and the first thing I looked as I came back was my rifle laying against the bank, which I had to put it. And then I looked up, and there's a little German paratrooper that had Gray Edwards out of the ditch and was holding him up there and had his rifle aimed at me. Later I found out the rifle was weird looking weapon for a German to have, and it was called a Marsch Auto Beretta. It wasn't their usual weapon. It might have been something for paratroops, but the regular German wouldn't be carrying that thing. It looked like a light 30 caliber machine gun, a barrel cover with all the holes in it, But anyway, he gives me this bit to come on out, and I climbed up that side, got out. Then if you can, let's see, so kind of give you some idea. Well, the ditch was over there, like behind him, long ditch, deep. And the barn was over here. This is where the platoon headquarters was, where the lieutenant was with his people. And the German had us over that way. Now he's got us walking towards the barn. Now I don't like that a damn bit. The first thing that comes to me is the minute he finds out that he's going into our hands, that he's going to start shooting with that weapon. So that had me scared to start with. He's pushing us and pushing me in the back with the gun barrel and pushing us on. And we had taken 10 or 15, maybe 20 steps. The lieutenant, which I cannot remember, and I can't remember his name, and none of the people I've talked to in the last 24 or 48 hours could remember his name either. Even Captain Hancock, because Captain Hancock got hit the second day we were in battle. He got one in the chest. But anyway, this lieutenant steps out from behind the barn. This wasn't dark. I mean, it was daylight. He steps out from behind the barn and hollers and motions, "Bring him over here! Bring him over here!" Put yourself in that position, and you got a German behind you with a machine gun sticking you in the back, and your commander sticks his head out and says, "Bring him over here." Oh my God. Then I was tense, waiting for the bullets to hit. And we went another 15 or 20 steps, and I said, Gray, we've got to take this guy or he's going to kill us. And he said, yep, you're right. And the guy had just poked me in the back with his rifle, so I knew where the rifle was. And I had done some playing, you know, taking guns from guys. We did some of that in training. Not officially, but in the barracks we'd try to see who could take the gun away from the next guy. Well, fortunately I had been pretty good at it. And where he was in the back and kind of in the middle, when us